I was down at the 9/11 memorial. It was very difficult to get into, and I had to go in my little time slot. And during the visit there, I was very struck by the fact that the monument contains no symbols, no flags, no evidence that the memorial is in the United States or that it involved an attack or that America had anything to do with that particular event. And so I'm wondering I don't want you to comment on the monument, you haven't seen it at the memorial, but it seemed to me to suggest a kind of discomfort that our elites have with patriotism.
Yes.
And I want you to make...
What was the word again?
Patriotism.
I want you to reflect or give us some thoughts about what you think is the proper role of patriotism in a healthy civic culture, and why it's become so problematic, and why our elites want to push it off at an arm's length.
Well, I think there are a couple of things going on. One is that patriotism has been elided to a nasty kind of aggressive nationalism. No distinction is made between the two. George Orwell wrote a brilliant essay making the distinction between the two. You know, a patriotism that involves love and care for one's country, a sense of responsibility about what happens to one's country, and a respect for the fact that other people have homelands and are patriotic with reference to their particular places as well. Nationalism is a different kind of attitude, according to Orwell. I think it's a helpful essay to make that distinction. So we fail to make that distinction, and we ally the two, and then it turns out patriotism is a bad thing. But I think there's something else going on, more deeply philosophical, if you will, and that's the notion that what patriotism represents is a particular type of attachment. And there's a tendency on the part of liberal society and certain of its manifestations to believe that the closer you come to something sort of universal and non-particular, the better. So that, you know, that helps to account, for example, bear with me here, this may seem like a stretch, but bear with me, why, for example, the Jews historically were a problem for liberal social contract thinkers.
You know, particularistic.
Too particularistic. So, you know, so Marx has to spend this time writing his essay on the Jewish question, and how do we deal with the Jewish question? Well, we'll deal with it when Jews have disappeared. You know, when they've been assimilated into the universal. So I think there's something of that, you know, in the left historically that derided particular attachments and affections and a sense of place in favor of what was sometimes called cosmopolitanism, or, you know, some notion of an identity that's not tethered in any way, that's not tied to a particular place with its memories and its affections and so on and so forth. And I think that's part of what's at work here, that general attitude, so that it's now sort of considered bad taste or embarrassing to openly express your patriotism or your love of country. That too has been a development of the last 40 or 50 years. And I'm not sure that anyone's done an in-depth study of it, but it would be very interesting to figure out what all the sources are of it. What I know is how patriotism gets beaten up, you know, in a lot of the literature that I'm familiar with in favor of this more cosmopolitan attitude. And there's a moral theory involved here that my particular attachment to my own child is a problem because it doesn't mean I care about all children generically, when in fact the reason I can have some sense of care about all children is because I do know what it means to care for a child. So you arrive at these more universal commitments through the particular, rather than starting out way up here with all children, you know. And so something of that dynamic is at work, that patriotism is a bad, puny thing.
So, you know? So patriotism in the Elsteinian world, patriotism rightly understood, let's say, not aggressive chauvinism or nationalism, but true love of country would be a pathway, or maybe one of the very few pathways, to understanding other people's love
for their particular countries. You know, how can you understand their affection for a place if you don't appreciate your own.
Yeah.
There's more going on. I mean, I think there's more work that one would have to do to explain why the animus among so many elites toward any evocation of patriotism. But that would be, what I've suggested would be a couple of ways to begin to look at the issue.
I mean, it could also be the case that I think a lot of contemporary liberalism sees itself as sort of being a managerial elite that leans over the particular loyalties and conflicts that arise from those loyalties.
Right.
Which is reinforced by a kind of globalized economy.
Yes.
And the idea that you can be an international banker and be in Shanghai or Tokyo and carry your identity lightly enough that it doesn't get in the way of commerce.
Exactly. Well, Milan Kunder's novel, The Unbearable Lightness of Being, you have this theme being wonderfully played out, in two of the female characters, one of whom illustrates the heaviness of being. She can't be away from Czechoslovakia. She's a Czech, and when her homeland is invaded by the Soviet Union in 1968, she's got to be back there and share this with her people. She can't just be at some other place. And that's the character Teresa. And then there's the other female character who's the Luftmensch, who is floating around, in cosmopolitan places, winds up, I think, on the shores of Cape Cod at some point after having been in Zurich and so on. It feels no particular affinity for her homeland. So you have this illustration of these two very different ways of being in the world in relation to a history and a time and a place. So that might be an interesting, if you're concerned with this issue, an interesting treatment in fiction of...
It might, but of course one would need to point out that these novels have nothing to do with the scientific study
of politics. That's right. I forewarn you. Yes. There should be a label, in fact.